Welcome to Passionate World Talk Radio. Educate, enlighten, entertain.
Welcome to the Energy Stoners Cafe. My name is Toni Quest, and I'm really happy that you're here. I like to interview the most interesting people I can find on the planet. So grab a cup of coffee, sit down, relax, and listen. You're going to find that these guests are so intriguing, you'll wonder why you didn't know about them before. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Energy Stoners Cafe. I'm really happy when you come and visit me here because I really love this job. And the reason I love it is because I get to interview the most interesting people on the planet. And the internet allows me to do that. The internet to me is my friend. You don't have to leave home necessarily to actually travel the world. And that's what I love about the internet. And that's what I love about this show. And I know I have an international audience. Now, today, I'm interviewing one of my favorite people. She's a definite friend of the show. She's a friend of the Energy Stoners Cafe. And her name is Beth Gersh-Nesic. And I've interviewed her before. Beth is an art historian. And her organization is called the New York Arts Exchange. And she is very much the appreciator of arts and the artists and the things that come behind the art. She can look beneath the earth, the surface of it. In my head, I've never told her this. I believe that she has some like foresight. She has a gift of foreseeing as an art historian. And so tonight we're going to talk about what we're going through in a collective right now, which will end up being part of art history. It'll definitely be part of history, and how that really affects the creative collective mind. And also about, I'm going to ask Beth also about other crises and chaos throughout history and what kind of art comes out of that. So Beth, welcome back to this show. We love you more than ever now because I really do believe that you have the gift of forethought. I really do, because of the way you look at other people's arts. I'm not going to talk about my own, but I'm going to talk about the kind of projects. I'm going to ask you about the kind of projects that are going on right now during our global pandemic, and also the Black Lives Matters movement. And what kind of art can you anticipate will come out of this? And can you reflect, Beth, on other art that's happened throughout the history that we've lived through? I mean, I think that the young people protesting, it reminds me very much of the way I was at their age, during the late 60s and early 70s. So welcome to the show. Now it's your turn. I want to hear what you got to say.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh, Toni, this is such a pleasure. I love talking to you. You know we can talk forever.
Yes, we can.
And we enjoy it. We keep going, and it's always exciting, and we compare notes, and also we're on the same wavelength, and we know what's going on Earth and maybe in several dimensions beyond just the here and now. So we're both plugged in, and we're looking forward to that as becoming a way of communicating. So at the moment, you're asking me a couple of things about, art that's been evidently came out of chaos historically, that we can look at and say, yeah, that's what happened after maybe rupture. We also have art which shows pain. We have art which is influencing rupture, and we have art which is reacting to rupture. So there's so many different levels that we can start out with. And when I start to think about, if you say historically, I make myself go all the way back, to the ancient times and think, did we have evidence? Clearly, we had the eruption of Vesuvius, and we know what happened there, that a lot of people and shops and everything was buried within, moments. And then it took centuries to finally recover. And we saw people, their outer appearance, and dogs and bakeries and everything as if it had stopped just cold. And that, of course, is evidence of something traumatic, something unexpected, and what are the results. So we study them only to find out what was that civilization like, and how with so much evidence that was perfect, we have a lot of things that survived. I also go back to the ruptures that happened in ancient Egypt and the fact that we look at the artwork, and at the very beginning with the Old Kingdom, it's in such a extraordinary condition, and the expression and everything looks great. And then we know there was a rupture. There was apparently no heir at some point to the pharaoh. They had a war that lasted about 100 years, more than a generation of artists. So when we get into the Middle Kingdom, that's after about 120 years of losing tradition, and then we look at what happened. So that art that comes out of it, you can see it in the Metropolitan, it's clear. When you go from Old Kingdom to the Middle Kingdom looks like it's clunky, and it takes a little while for everyone to get the hang of it, and then finally we have some nice art, and then there's another rupture, and then we get into the beautiful New Kingdom. So those are things where you can say there's rupture, there was something that happened that was cataclysmic, war, and people who lost their way, right?
Wow.
So you're asking me what happened. We had plagues.
Yeah, plagues.
We have evidence of one of the things that comes up when you're studying the history of art is we have this magnificent manuscript that strangely wasn't finished. It's very clear. There are outlines, and it just didn't have the painting inside of the interior of these lines, so it must have been left suddenly. So we think that those artists, the Lambourg brothers, died in a plague.
The Lambourg who are they? Who were they?
So the Limbourg, and they're responsible for the beautiful hours, the Belzer that we have in the cloisters.
Oh, yes.
And that's complete. And then what is the other one that's on the internet? You can look it up. The very beautiful hours, the Trécheur. I'm saying it, I hope people can get that, the Trécheur. Those works of art, if you go on something like Wikipedia, you can find them. They're beautiful paintings. You have the zodiac, and after a while you realize that the paintings are slightly different. Somebody's completed paintings. Not all of them are by the same people. So we know that the brothers, there were three fellows, John in English, Paul, and Hugo, and they were active until about 1416, and suddenly that seems to be evidence they suddenly died. And that's during a plague, so we think that must have been the reason. But suddenly there's no continuation of this manuscript. And then it was continued later on by other hands, so that you can see the plague has evidence of having some presence in the history of art. We can talk about that.
Do you think it's also, you wouldn't know, but for sure, I guess, but there's the visual art and then there's writing. I find in this particular juncture that we're at right now, I'm talking to other artists, and many of them are, like myself and others, are visual artists, but they're finding themselves writing, or both. Writers finding themselves creating visual art. It seems, that's just a process, and I won't burden you with trying to wrap your mind around that, but I am kind of curious. Have you seen any art? I've seen some things around, some writing that people are doing, and people are having special presentations, special exhibits. There's one that's happening as we speak that's called Climbing the Walls. And it opened, I think, at the beginning of June, and it goes through into September.
And who is sponsoring this?
Mara Mills Studio Theater in Exile. And it'll be like a virtual performing thing. There are some writers, poets, and actors, singers. She's a director, and I've seen her work as a director. She's excellent at that, but she's actually producing this. And I've spoken to some people and talked about the kind of work they'll be actually submitting to this exhibit. There's another person in town, Cora Ray Johnson, I pretty sure
Yes.
she's sponsoring a program like What Are You Doing During This or something like that. And people are submitting wonderful art.
Oh, yes. It's very interesting you ask this question. Some artists I know have been so upset that they are sitting in their studios feeling that they're not productive. I have a friend, Stephen Lane, who's in Brooklyn, and he's just really productive. He feels this is the best thing that ever happened to him, that he's alone in the studio without having to commute for his job. So, he also, I think, is working on maybe a performance piece in front of the Whitney, which is all boarded up.
Oh,
this is something
really?
I'm not clear about, so I'm not going to say anything if I don't know what I'm talking about. But I know that he talked about a performance piece. One thing that came up today was that the boarded up museums, of course over the glass, seems to send the wrong message. And I was thinking, maybe this is something that Stephen's going to be taking up in his art. He had an exhibition in Japan. While everybody's closed down, he had sent his things over to Japan a while ago. And so that is, for him, a very lucky break, that while Japan was still open, his show was going on. And his work deals with isolation in terms of it's influenced by Chinese books that he picks up. He had an exhibition at the Eldridge Museum a year ago. So it is reactive, it's political, and also there's something about, the isolation of the individual, which we're all feeling. I mean, this is, how do you feel? Well, there's isolation of ourselves. We were in these lockdown situations. And also I think that there's a reaction now, we're talking about Black Lives Matter, that there is, are we a community now? Can we reach out to each other? Can we show that there is that sense, that desire for us to be unified after we had all of this isolation?
Yeah, we'd hope so, but it's not necessarily so. Like I was saying, everybody's situation is so unique, and I know some artist friends of mine who have done nothing. They become immobilized, and nothing happens. And there's the other people that let it spill out a different way. I know after 9/11, which seems like forever ago, but it really wasn't that long ago in the grand scheme of things, that a lot of art came out of that. And then there were those of us that didn't have that knee-jerk reaction, let me sell something now, let me do something now. But I personally felt immobilized creatively after it until maybe 2 years later. That's when it hit. But I think that there were times in history, writings, like there was a book, I'm trying to remember, Love in the Age of Chlorella. Is that the disease?
Oh, yes. Love in the time of...
Cholera.
Cholera.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. And now that I'm having a senior moment. It's Marquez. I should run and get the book right now.
That's all right.
But I know what you're.
You have the book. Okay.
Yes, I do. Love in the time of cholera.
Cholera. Yes.
And exactly. So I can look it up on my internet. But of course, I'm now nervous, wondering what is this book. So I'll just look it up.
It's something to think about because with the don't touch mandate, no handshakes. You can't even shake hands, let alone hug, nothing. And what happens, the book, I believe, is about falling in love during this time when you can't touch because we're all so contagious.
Yes, and also, actually, recently I've put out my hand. I just couldn't remember that. I'm not supposed to do that. It's Love in the Time of Cholera by Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
Right. There we go. There you go.
And, I looked it up on the internet. And the whole idea for us is to realize, again, yes, that these are the kinds of experiences in which we feel, that there are, let us, like The Plague, the one that was written by Albert Camus, what did other people feel at a different time? What are we similar in our reaction to it? And of course, this is, it was first published in 1985, but it's a classic. It's something that feels as though it's a timeless, that's talking about love in the time of cholera. And The Plague, the one that was written by Camus, that came out in 1940. It was written in 1942. Mm-hmm. So, that was a time in which the reaction to it actually really wasn't about the specific disease, but also talking about Nazis, and, it's a different influence. Mm-hmm. And we know also, talking about whether you write or you don't write, right now there's a group of people who are following something on the internet, and you get it as an email, and it's on Facebook, and it's called the Isolation Journals, and that is generated by a woman who had written for the New York Times, Life Interrupted, and it was about her going through recovering, I hope it's true, recovering from leukemia at a very young age.
Yeah.
And her name is Suleika Jewel. She is a journalist, and now she's going to be publishing a book, which is what had happened to her after she left. I believe that's what it is. It still hasn't come out, Between Two Kingdoms. Mm-hmm. So that is an interesting experience because it comes in your email every day, the prompt, and it's 100 days of working on our reaction to whatever it is that's going on. I am not writing, I am reading, and so I wake up in the morning and enjoy myself.
There you go. There you go. But it's interesting because I wonder sometimes what old, the artists historically, what the artists did during these things. We know that Edgar Allan Poe, there's the legend, or I don't know if it's true or not, that he was an alcoholic. I don't believe that. I think he had low blood sugar. That's my opinion. That's what I believe. At the same time, people say he was like a very troubled person, and his poetry was very dark.
Well, he wrote The Mask of the Red Death.
Yeah, you wrote a few things, yes.
When I think about writing and art, I think what happened after World War II. What happened? We had the Americans who were here and participated, artists who didn't participate in the war at the front. And we had, of course, the trauma of World War I. That's a long story. Mm-hmm. But going back to World War II, remember what came out of that was abstract.
Right.
And that was abstract expressionism in New York, and there was Taquisma in Europe. And essentially, when people say, oh, what was that reaction about? The evidence is there were no words. There were no words. There could be no images. It had to be visceral. It had to be something that really came out of you with something that looked like it was just innate. It had to be a gesture. It had to you had to feel the energy. You had to feel the anxiety. So I think, that at this moment, I don't know if we'll have abstraction coming out of this pandemic and Black Lives Matter. And they're not necessarily the same thing. We had World War I and we had the Spanish flu overlapping. And that doesn't mean that the reaction to both ended up with the art of the 20s. Yeah. I don't think that you can say that. I believe that the pandemic certainly was a trauma that we haven't explored quite yet, the Spanish flu. And we always think that it's World War I that created the Roaring Twenties, the idea that you survive and therefore, you're so in love with life that you become very extravagant, and that was, I think, the excesses of the 20s.
So you disagree, or you agree with that?
I think it's going to be very interesting. I don't know if we would become excessive now, because what happened, I think people believe that the idea of global warming, the fear of destroying our planet, had become, for a lot of people, an absolutely vital situation. And now we see, with fewer cars and fewer airline flights and the rest of it, there may be something to having less in the atmosphere that is toxic.
Right.
So can we, as we individually gave ourselves to healing people through staying home, and I know that's at this particular moment, as we're talking today, we have some tension between people who will and won't cooperate with this decision to stay home and stem the pandemic. But let's suppose people who do believe that works also are starting to think, if I weren't using my car so often, if I weren't taking so many airline flights, perhaps I can also make a contribution to cleaning up the planet.
There are those of us that think that way, believe it or not.
And there is evidence. We see that there's much more, there's nature seems to be blossoming in our neck of the woods. There's real evidence. We had a black bear in Scarsdale they're supposed to. A lot of people have brought up the fact that there were dolphins in Venice, but there's some source that says that was actually, I think it was photoshopped, or there was a misnomer there. Anyway, the point is that isn't exactly true.
Right.
But I think that what is true is what you and I can see in front of our eyes, that it's a beautiful spring. I think that the earth is thriving because we have less contaminations from fuel and perhaps other things as well.
Yeah.
As we go through this.
It's true. People are cleaning up. It's kind of like I look out my window because I live in a small city, and I see that people are trying to clean it up a bit. But I want to just digress a little bit here about historical art. I want to talk to you and ask you about the degenerate art that came out of, and that's a name that one group gave the art of another group during World War II, the degenerate art thing. I don't know. I have a student that from several years ago had become obsessed with it, degenerate art, so much so that every December she decided she's going to have a degenerate art festival. And no work in this festival in Manhattan could cost more than, I think it was $100 or something, because it was by the degenerates. Now, I understand that the Nazis bought art from German Gentiles and called it degenerate art.
Well, so I think she's got, your friend, whoever's working on it, is two different ideas that were intertwined. But I'll tell you what the degenerate art and Tarta art was the name that the Germans gave to modern art. And they looked at art that was by Picasso and Matisse, and the Germans, the people who were in the Bridge group, the Brucha, and in the Die Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider, R-I-D-E-R, that was Kandinsky and Kirchner, and all these people who we look at art right now and realize that they are the major artists of the moment in modern times. And those were put together in a show by the Nazis to show that they were not good artists, that they were contaminating. That is what degenerate meant. Oh. They were contaminating culture. And Hitler and his followers believed that there should be something classical. That was the great art that they should have, something that looked like it was the same, copying what Roman art looked like in their minds, which isn't necessarily what we know as Roman art, but their concept of the only good art was a classical art. That Hitler had applied to art school and was rejected.
What? I didn't know that.
Oh, this is the big story. Imagine if he had been accepted and went in the direction of making art. But he was rejected the application was rejected, and therefore he went in the direction which he did, and we now know, of course, what came out of that.
Yeah.
But that's, imagine if, he had never had access to the situation that he got himself into, what a different world we'd be in.
Well, we don't know what kind of art it would be. It might have been hyper-propaganda, hyper-negative propaganda that he might have generated, because very often art is social commentary, as you know. So I was curious. I'm glad you straightened me out on that one, because I really had a different impression of degenerate art. And why did they refer to them as degenerates?
It was the opinion of the Nazis about modern art. And so going back to that concept itself, so this is the art that came out from before World War I and in between the wars, World War I, World War II. So these people were confiscated, and a lot of them were in collections that the Jews had. So naturally, this was also part of the notion. In the beginning of the 20th century and through into World War II, the notion that Jews were bringing art, they were gallerists, making art, some of them as well, were considered to be a contamination in the populace. And I have lots of material on that. So it was seen that it was a conspiracy of the Jews. Cubism was a conspiracy of the Jews. And all of those people like Kahnweiler were in on it in order to make French art. This isn't Germany. We're talking about French art. French culture was going to be destroyed because of the people who brought this terrible modern art into the galleries and into the salons, and it was they're perpetrating this blight. And all of these words and everything are available if you look it up.
Wow, it's interesting. And I'm always fascinated by you, Beth, that you just remember it all. You weren't even there, but you kind of, I guess you're very well studied.
I've given talks on this too, so it's not miraculous. It's studied.
You can own it. It's okay. You're cool. You're cool. You can own it. It's okay. Because I don't know as much as you. I only know one other person in my life that knew as much as you know about art. And he's not here anymore to talk about it. But I think that there's some really interesting stuff coming out of this particular crisis. And I'm really looking forward to having the opportunity to view it. The difference now, I guess, in now that we didn't have in years past is that we can actually have these virtual exhibits that are happening, and people are pretty much stepping up to the plate. I mean, if you can handle it, the tedium of getting your work photographed and then upload it someplace and move it to your own files and then share it for these people that are looking for specific files. It's not like a regular exhibit where they're saying they're not taking anything larger than a 20 by 30. This is different. You have to actually an artist has to, even if they're not a digital artist, has to be capable of reproducing their work into a file to submit to show the entire world. The upside of that, if you can handle the learning curve, is that you can show your work to the entire world. I mean, how do you think that's going to change the way people look at our society? I'm going to say 100 years from now, 100 years. I'm not going to go forward too much. I mean, what will they see us as when they examine the art that came out of the beginning of the 21st century?
What will they think? Well, first of all, one of the things, it's hard to wrap our arms around it all because we've had so many different tendencies, specifically, after the 60s into the 70s, there's so much stuff. But going back to what you said about everything, being able to generate it. So I participated. People said, okay, what do we do now? Closing galleries. But I wanted to do something for the New York Arts Exchange, which is on our blog, which is the website has the blog, was first soothing. I decided, before artists were actually making the art, I thought, what kind of art do people want? That's a choice. So I took from art that was already in existence and said to artists whose art I thought was spiritual, start out with spiritual art. And I put Lester Rappaport, that is something abstract. I chose his discs, and I was also talking about the fact that, we were going through, I love astrology, that we were going through this specifically unusual moment that was cataclysmic, and we're looking at the aspects. So I felt that the spirituality, astrology, and soothing, beautiful work.
Yeah.
The second person I chose has a Matisse feeling for drawing. Again, apolitical, just soothe people because we're sitting at home. And you're right. And I sent it out, and it wasn't going to be hierarchical, like who's better than whom or whatever it was
Right.
that people think about. It would be one person at a time. And
Okay.
I wanted that. When the protests began, I thought, what is appropriate? Well, clearly, the first thing is to mourn the loss of life. This was, for me, was paramount. So I started to look for the murals, which are all over the place. And you're right, that meant, so I curated an exhibition on the internet. It can go out anywhere, and people from all over the world will be able to see these individual memorials. You have the mural, the interpretation of this person, and also you have the ideas of what to do for memorial. You have flowers, you have the candles, And then there were people looking at it, so you get a scale. And so I did just a few of them for each person that, not everyone who had died, but the people who are right now prominent in our minds.
Yeah.
So we had, of course, it began with George Floyd, it was Trayvon Martin, it was Breonna Taylor, and all of it, and
Amadou Diallo. They finally mentioned Amadou.
Oh, Amadou Diallo I didn't have a mural for that. Eric Garner, definitely, and Sandra Blaine. So not enough, but at least it was to remember, and the memorials themselves. If you're asking about art, I think that's paramount. Number one is the art, and there are murals, a lot of murals. It's not just a few. So that way people are expressing something through, it's gigantic. It's also public, which at this moment means you don't have to wait for the galleries to open, the museums to open. This is public, and nobody's required to pay to get to see it, and everybody can be in front of it with a mask now. So this is wonderful. This is exactly where we have to go. I would hope that's going to be a trend. So we have the internet, yes, but also more public art. You just stand in front of it, and you are welcome to be there.
And I think I feel that art is more accessible now. It's funny that you said that you think it's going to be a trend. I just want to throw this out and get your impressions of my impression. My feeling is that with this mandate, it's not even a mandate, but being urged to really stay home to stop the spread of the virus. And I don't see that I'm suffering so much all the time. I'm not going to say that it's not lonely, because most people, if you're sensible, you're not going to have a lot of people coming into your space, But at the same time, because artists by design, no pun intended, we work alone. The painting is not going to paint itself. And so I'm really curious. I wish I could be here in 100 years just to look at the art that was generated from this period.
You're right. First of all, creative people like you are actually, and fortunately for you, and I'm so happy for you too, that this is not creating a psychological crisis where you're paralyzed. So you're using it well. And there are people who know, fortunately, they are self-aware, you are self-aware, that this is good. For them, this is good. To stay home and not feel this tension of having to go out and be with a lot of people. I know Trevor Noah mentioned it. He said, I'm good. And I thought, I get that. So I feel also that because I don't have to worry so much about should I be here and there, that I'm better off by myself getting something done. So it is, for creatives, this is a bonus. And also, of course, people have to say, I feel guilty, but I'm doing well with this and all the rest. But good, stay home. It is the right thing to do. I'm absolutely convinced we are helping people if we stay home. And you and I particularly, because we're in that age group, they're asking us,
exactly, yeah.
Please do not be the people.
Don't be, yeah.
So if you feel, you personally, if you feel comforted knowing I'm doing my part, and my art is my expression. Now, when I was working on the murals, I thought immediately of US and Us. And I thought,
you texted me.
I texted you. I said, what are you doing with this? Because I thought, this has to be somewhere. This is really the moment for it.
It's interesting you say that, because there's a trend, and I'm thinking that I think when they look back on this particular era in time, they're going to see that there is a trend, and I've interviewed someone very recently about this. There's a trend to take art and put it on apparel. It can go beyond a T-shirt, but the T-shirt is so universal. And I'm wondering if they'll look at us as a commercial artist kind of generation, but it's hard to say, because I see a lot of people are selling stuff. As soon as the coronavirus came to light, all of a sudden, and it was sudden, there were people making these face masks, the artists and the artisans that have the capability and the inclination to do something like sew it. And they were taking these materials and they were putting it together and following instructions on the internet, doing it their own way. There's one woman that makes these masks. She was doing them on March 22nd. She was making them, or maybe even before that. I was lucky to get 2 of them, and hers were special, and she set herself apart. But they're very creative, and they're almost like crafted pieces. And she's using special fabric that is indicative of a certain culture. So let's say they're like African material. I talked to my African friend who was wearing my mask. She says, "Oh, they sell this fabric in my country." Her country was Ghana. And so that's the kind of thing that I'm observing. And I'm just saying, I'm asking you as an art historian, that's why I say that you have a little bit of clairvoyance in you, because you can look at a piece of art and see the significance of it and the timelessness of it. You just have a way of doing that. I've noticed that about you, knowing you.
Oh, thank you. I don't know if it's clairvoyance. I'd love to have clairvoyance.
Well, it's a talent for foresight when it comes to art. Even though you're not specifically an artist, you're a person that just appreciates art and understands art and knows the history of art. And I'm just curious. I wish I could come back. And I'm not going to say I wish I could come back. When I come back in 100 years, or if I look over it in 100 years and look at the stuff that's being generated, I know that I'll see things that are indicative of the times that we're in.
We will. They're already collecting the signs for the protests. So everyone is, they're quite aware that we have like an archive already generating, so they're making that a special effort that museums can be doing, while nobody's actually going there. And I know what you said about the masks. I think that's actually fascinating for me. You know very well, when we did Art Above the Sofa, and I got to know Christina Thomas Green, she had given us the boxes, that she was the one who had said, look, people are past putting it on the wall. Remember, this was the conversation. Well, what about this Art Above the Sofa? What is it? So she said, people are past that now. They want to own it. Maybe they want it as on their phones. Maybe they want it as something which is their phone cover. Or maybe they want it as a T-shirt or a bag, something that you carry around as a backpack or, slung over your shoulder.
Right.
But you're absolutely right. I think certainly T-shirts, particularly with your image, that would make such a statement if a lot of people were wearing it.
A lot of people are wearing it already. I'll have to tell you that, Beth. You gave me that little thing. You gave me the push, and I answered the call. I said, "Yeah, she's right. I should just do it." And
I hope you have one left over for me.
I am. Oh yes, no, there's one for you.
All right. Well, we'll talk about that after this.
Yeah, but people are wearing it already. I'm really quite startled by it, to tell you the truth. Even though that piece has gotten a lot of action in itself, and it sort of proves my statement is that you can make money as an artist if you go think out of the box a little bit, because we're very lucky that we can reproduce our work digitally, in many forms. And I can put a G-clay on a T-shirt. I've been doing it for a few years now. I just haven't done this one. I think that in terms of art history and thinking in the future, I would love to see the way art from the early 21st century art is presented in the classroom. And boy, if you could come back and teach it, Beth, that would be the best.
Well, I will be. I'll be reincarnated. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, and I'll be there with you.
But your T-shirt, for example, was There You Go. How do you feel? I mean, here is 2 things which are significant. First is the image, which is very powerful. But 2 is its context. It's public, and it's not elitist, and it's something which is going to be, well, you tell me, because I don't want to put words in your mouth. Mm-hmm. But here is an exhibition which is taking place through the presentation of the body, which is mingling within, a certain context, and therefore, it just adds so much more, rather than you go inside of a room which is separated out of the public, and, it's already removing. You're in a certain neighborhood, and then you're in a certain place that you're supposed to go to, and all the rest of the things that separate art out of mainstream experience of it. Here, it's going to be part of, it'll be shoulder to shoulder with other people.
Yeah. Interesting. It is interesting. And I think that I find you interesting in that you were sort of so fascinated with this piece in 2014 or 2015 or 2016, whatever it was, but yet it was painted in 2003 and sold in 2006 to a gallery owner that just had the same kind of foresight that you have. She had to have it, and I sold it to her, but then my agent told me, it's still yours, TQ. You can do whatever you want with it. And here we are, fast forward from when I painted it in 2003, 17 years later, it's still relevant.
That's what makes great art, that it's timeless. In this case particularly, I think your story about it is so magnificent because it started out with a completely different crisis.
It started with a different crisis, and it was generated from me to the canvas through a different process. And we have to wrap it up, but you're going to come back on the show and talk about these things more. But I just have to share with you and the audience that the little boy who took the photograph that sparked my imagination to make the painting, is now a young man, a junior in college. He was 3 years old in 2003.
Yes, and that's so we know what you said earlier in the program is true. So we had the attack on the World Trade Center 2001, but your reaction, your sense of...
My timing was...
Your timing, but... you explain your sense of what brought that particular image together, generated from something that was already almost 2 years old, and what is it that you wanted to tell people with this?
Yeah, what I wanted to tell them is that Black people in the United States, our DNA is in the flag, and that's really what it's about. And we have a sense of ownership. Many of us, or I'll talk for myself, I have a sense of ownership when it comes to the fiber of this country. And my patriotism is of a different, it's not exactly what people would think. And the piece, as the flag is flying upside down, it's patriotic in that I feel that Black people in 2003, when I painted it, were always in distress. It wasn't just the World Trade Towers. So, that's what the piece is about. But yet all of a sudden, Black Lives Matter, you looked at it, and before Black Lives Matter in 2015, and you had a sense of it. That's why I say that you had forethought with this, and all of a sudden, it's more relevant than it has ever been.
Absolutely. And this word that you're using, distress.
Distress.
That's really significant. You've described the DNA of, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, the DNA of the Black experience is in our flag.
The DNA of the Black experience is in the flag. It's in everything about this country, and so I think that I'm glad that we're having this conversation. We need to get together again because I think that it should be an expanded conversation.
I'm for that, definitely.
Based on your expertise, based on your historical expertise when it comes to art.
Well, you're the artist. I'm only just the commentator.
I'm just a chick from Amerenik. That's what I always tell people. I'm just a chick from Amerenik that grew up. And every Black person has a different experience, so and all our experiences are similar and different. And the same with everybody, all colors of people in this country. And on that note, I'm going to just end this conversation to be continued because I think it's really important right now. And, I'm lucky enough to have like a platform to actually present ideas. And I'm lucky enough to know you, Beth Gersh-Nesic, because you're definitely historical. You're like an art historian genius, and I only knew one other, and I was married to him, and unfortunately he passed away. And I used to have these conversations with him. And I just want to tell the audience that I really appreciate them during this interview to listen to it, and please share it with your friends. When you get it, please share it with people. It's very relevant. And also know that I'm going to have Beth back because she's brilliant when it comes to this. And I appreciate so much knowing her. And I appreciate the audience for coming to listen to the show. Thank you for coming to listen to the Energy Stoners Cafe. And I'm really looking forward to getting feedback on this interview. And I promise you that I will have Beth Gersh-Nesic on again, because she is a friend of the show. And anybody who listens to this, I love. Okay? So I'll see you next time. And thanks again, Beth.
Thank you.
Talk about your website one more time for New York Arts Exchange.
Thank you, Toni. You are so special. I feel very blessed that I know you.
No, it's
so
mutual.
You are a great friend of the New York Arts Exchange. You're part of the Arts Exchange. You know that. So www.newyorkartsexchange.com.
Yeah, newyorkartsexchange.com, everybody. And I'm looking forward to feedback on this. And I anticipate working on something that's very unifying with Beth in the foreseeable future. And thanks for coming to the show. I think it's an important conversation. And thanks again, Beth. Thank you, audience, for coming to visit the Energy Stoners Cafe. I promise I'll have another great guest for you next time. And Beth Gersh is going to be back. I say goodnight. Thank you. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Energy Stoners Cafe.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Talk Radio. You can listen to this program all over again by going over to https://passionateworldtalkradio.com. You can also hear it on Spotify, Spreaker, Amazon Alexa, AMFM247.com every Tuesday evening between 8 and 9 p.m. YouTube, Facebook Live, LinkedIn, and all the other podcast directories one can find on the Internet.